The twin suns of Drakterra cast long shadows across the palace grounds as Kale hefted another bucket of water toward the livestock pens. His shoulders ached from the day's work, but he didn't complain. Stable boys who complained didn't last long in the Draconic Empire. Above him, the massive stone towers of the Imperial Palace reached into the crimson sky. Somewhere up there, in chambers he would never see, the dragons lived, the rulers of this world, the masters of 1,000 conquered species. Kale had seen them flying overhead countless times, magnificent creatures with scales that gleamed like jewels and wings that blotted out the suns. He always looked away quickly. Humans weren't supposed to stare at dragons. The rules were simple and absolute. Humans worked in the lower levels. They tended the riding beasts, cleaned the courtyards, grew the food, and repaired the buildings. They never, under any circumstances, went near the dragon roosts. The few humans who had tried over the years had been found dead or mad, their minds shattered by the psychic pressure that dragons naturally emitted. It was just how things were. Dragons were superior. Humans were not. Kale poured the water into the trough and watched the 6-legged draft animals drink. These creatures he understood. They were simple, honest, and didn't care that he was human. Sometimes he preferred their company to his own kind. The other stable workers spent their evenings complaining about the dragons or telling impossible stories about escape. Kale saw no point in either. This was life. You survived it. A commotion near the palace gates caught his attention. Dragon guards were rushing toward the main entrance, their metallic armor clanking. Human servants scattered like leaves in a storm. Something was wrong. "Get inside!" one of the senior stable masters shouted at the workers. "The Emperor is having another episode." Kale's chest tightened. Everyone had heard the rumors. Emperor Zarthun, who had ruled for 3 centuries, was ill. His temper had grown violent, his flames unpredictable. 3 dragon attendants had been injured last week. The High Council was growing desperate. The other stable boys ran for the barracks, but Kale was caught on the wrong side of courtyard. He'd been sent to deliver medical supplies to physicians' quarters for the livestock. The builder was across the open space, and between him and safety was nothing but exposed stone. A roar split the air. It wasn't like any sound Kale had ever heard. It was rage and pain mixed together, so powerful it seemed to shake the very ground. Windows shattered in the upper levels. Birds exploded from the trees in panic. Then he saw him. Emperor Zarthun crashed through the palace's main doors, his massive form barely fitting through the opening. He was enormous, 50 feet of muscle, scale, and fury. His hide should have been gold and crimson, brilliant like sunrise. Instead, it looked dull, almost gray in patches. His eyes, which legend said could see into a person's soul, were wild and unfocused. Dragon guards tried to contain him, but the Emperor swatted them aside like insects. Servants who couldn't flee fast enough were crushed or burned. The smell of smoke filled the courtyard. Kale stood frozen. His mind screamed at him to run, but his legs wouldn't move. Fear had locked his muscles in place. The Emperor's head swung in his direction. Their eyes met across the courtyard. Kale felt something he couldn't explain. It wasn't the crushing psychic pressure he'd been warned about. It wasn't terror, though terror was certainly there. It was something else. Something like recognition, like a lock finding its key. The Emperor stopped thrashing. His wild eyes focused. His heaving breath slowed. The flames that had been licking around his jaws died to embers. Complete silence fell over the courtyard. Dragon guards stood motionless, afraid to break whatever spell had been cast. Human servants peered from doorways and windows. And Kale, still clutching his bucket, stared at the most powerful being in the known galaxy. Zarthun tilted his massive head, studying this insignificant human boy with an intensity that should have killed him. But Kale didn't fall, didn't scream, didn't go mad. A silver dragon landed beside the Emperor. Silthra, the chief advisor. She looked between Zarthun and Kale with astonishment written across her elegant features. "Impossible," she whispered. The Emperor made a sound deep in his chest, something between a growl and a purr. Then he turned and walked slowly back into the palace, leaving destruction in his wake. Kale collapsed to his knees, the bucket clattering on the stones. His hands shook. His heart hammered. But his mind was intact. Silthra approached him, her scales shimmering in the fading light. She looked at him as if seeing a human for the first time. "What is your name, stable boy?" "Kale, my lady," he managed. She nodded slowly. "Kale, remember this moment. Your life just changed forever." The dragon guards came for Kale at dawn. He'd spent a sleepless night in the barracks, listening to the whispers of other humans. Some said he was blessed. Most said he was dead. The older workers told stories of humans who caught dragon attention before. None of those stories ended well. "Come with us," the lead guard commanded. His voice was cold, his scaled face impossible to read. "Do not resist." Kale's hands trembled as he stood. The other stable boys watched him with mixed expressions of pity and relief that it wasn't them. No one said goodbye. In the Empire, you didn't mourn the dead before they died. It was considered bad luck. The walk through the palace was like entering another world. Kale had spent 19 years working in the lower levels, where stone was rough and halls were narrow. Here, everything was vast and beautiful. Ceilings soared hundreds of feet high. Walls were carved with scenes of dragon victories across the stars. Sunlight streamed through windows made of colored crystal, painting the floors in rainbow patterns. They passed dragon nobles who barely glanced at him. To them, he was livestock being led somewhere. Nothing worth noticing. They also passed human servants who pressed themselves against walls, their eyes wide. One older woman made a religious gesture Kale's mother had taught him years ago, a prayer for the dying. The guards led him higher and higher. His legs burned from climbing stairs built for creatures 4 times his size. His lungs struggled with air that felt thinner up here, but he kept moving. What choice did he have? Finally, they reached a set of doors so massive that 10 men together couldn't have opened them. Dragons didn't need handles. The guards pressed their claws against certain points, and the doors swung inward with a deep grinding sound. The Emperor's chamber lay beyond. Kale had imagined this place in nightmares. The reality was worse. The room was the size of a cathedral, with a ceiling lost in shadows. Mountains of treasure lined the walls, not because dragons were greedy, but because conquered worlds sent tribute. Weapons from 100 species hung as trophies, and in the center, on a raised platform of black stone, lay Emperor Zarthon. He looked even more terrible up close. His scales, which should have gleamed, were dull and cracked in places. His breathing was labored. Dark veins spider-webbed across his hide, like infection. The most powerful being in the galaxy was dying. Surrounding him were dragons Kale recognized from descriptions. The High Council. Silver Silthra was there, along with others whose scales ranged from deep blue to pure white. They turned to look at him, and the weight of their attention nearly drove him to his knees. "Approach," Silthra commanded. Every instinct told Kale to run. His body wanted to collapse. But he thought of his mother, dead 5 years now, who'd always said humans survive by being stubborn. So he forced his feet to move. 1 step, then another. The pressure in the room grew with each step. It felt like invisible hands pushing against his skull, trying to crush his thoughts. Other humans would have died by now. Kale could feel why. The dragon's presence was overwhelming. Ancient minds that had seen centuries, power that could level cities, awareness that cut through lies like knives. But he didn't die. The pressure was there, intense and terrible, but it didn't break him. It was like walking through a storm instead of being destroyed by it. He reached the platform. Up close, he could see the Emperor's eye, as large as Kale's entire head, watching him. "Touch him," Silthra ordered. "Place your hand on his scales." This was death, Kale thought. Direct contact with dragon's hide while they were conscious. No human had survived it. But he hadn't survived this long by refusing now. He reached out with shaking hand and placed his palm against the Emperor's side. Warmth flooded through him. Not heat that burned, but something else. It was like touching sunlight, or the feeling of coming home after a long journey. The pressure in his head didn't crush him. It settled, like a wild animal calming, and the Emperor's breathing eased. The change was visible. Color returned to patches of dull scale. The dark veins faded slightly. The labored breathing became steady and deep. Emperor Zarthon's eye closed, and for the first time in weeks, he seemed to be resting peacefully. The dragons of the High Council stared in shock. Impossible, one of them breathed. Silthra moved closer, examining both Kale and the Emperor with sharp eyes. His psychic signature is neutralizing the corruption. I've never seen anything like it. He's human. Another council member protested. They don't have psychic abilities. Clearly we were wrong, Silthra replied. She looked at Kale with something that might have been respect. What we thought was weakness. The human mind's inability to withstand our presence. Maybe something else entirely. This one doesn't resist our psychic pressure. He harmonizes with it. A blue dragon stepped forward. If he can calm the Emperor, he may be the key to curing him. The corruption is psychic in nature. Standard healing has failed. Then the answer is simple, Silthra announced. He stays. Kale's stomach dropped. Stays. You will remain in the Imperial Wing as the Emperor's personal attendant. You will not leave his side until we find a permanent cure. She paused. You should understand, this is not a request. Kale looked at the Emperor's massive sleeping form, then at the Council of Dragons who held his fate in their claws. His life as a stable boy was over. Whatever came next, he would face it the only way humans knew how, by surviving one moment at a time. The first week was silence. Kale's new quarters were larger than the entire barracks he'd shared with 20 other stable boys. The bed was soft, the food was better than anything he'd ever tasted, and he was absolutely terrified every moment of every day. Emperor Zarthun barely spoke to him. Kale would enter the chamber each morning, place his hands on the Emperor's scales, and feel that strange warmth flow between them. The dark veins would fade. The Emperor's breathing would ease. Then Kale would sit nearby, waiting to be needed, while the most powerful being in the universe ignored him completely. Dragon attendants brought food and supplies but wouldn't meet Kale's eyes. They resented him. This human, in a place no human should be. He didn't blame them. He resented being here too. On the 8th day, the Emperor finally spoke. You fear me? The voice was deep enough to vibrate in Kale's chest. Not cruel, just stating a fact. Kale considered lying, but something told him dragons could sense deception. Yes, your majesty, yet you do not run. Where would I run to? Kale asked, then immediately regretted his honesty. You didn't speak to emperors like that. But Zarthun made a sound that might have been amusement, a practical answer, very human. The great eye opened, focusing on Kale. Tell me, stable boy, what do you know of dragons? That you're powerful, that you rule the empire, that your presence can kill my kind. And yet here you sit alive and whole. The Emperor shifted, scales scraping against stone. Do you know why you survive when others do not? The Lady Silthra said something about harmonizing. I don't understand it. Zarthun was quiet for a long moment. We dragons speak through more than words. Our minds touch those around us, sharing thoughts and feelings. Most species cannot bear it. Their minds break under the weight of our consciousness. He paused. But your mind does not break. It bends. It flows around the pressure, like water around stone. Kale thought about that. We're adaptable. Humans, we have to be. We only live maybe 80 years if we're lucky. We don't have time to be rigid. 80 years. The Emperor sounded almost sad. I have ruled for 3 centuries. I knew your great-great-grandfather. Perhaps you are mayflies to us. Brief sparks that flicker and fade. Something about that made Kale angry. Not the hot anger that got you killed, but a cold, steady frustration. Maybe that's exactly why we matter. We don't have centuries to waste. Every day counts. Every choice is urgent. The Emperor's eye fixed on him with new intensity. You dare debate philosophy with me? Kale's courage faltered. I apologize, your majesty. Don't. Zarthun shifted again, bringing his massive head closer to where Kale sat. I have not had an interesting conversation in decades. Everyone agrees with me or stays silent. Continue. So Kale did. Over the following days, as he learned to care for the Emperor's failing body, they talked. Kale discovered which pressure points eased the pain in Zarthun's joints. He learned that the dull scales needed oil treatment, and that certain movements helped the Emperor breathe easier. The dragons had known anatomy, but not comfort. Kale brought a human touch, literally, to healing. And Zarthun talked. He spoke of the Empire's founding, of wars across the stars, of species that had risen and fallen. He spoke of his mate, Kiravel, who had died 200 years ago in battle. He spoke of the loneliness of leadership. We dragons believe we're shepherds, Zarthun said one evening. We maintain order because younger species destroy themselves without guidance. We've watched it happen. Civilizations that burn too bright and collapse. Maybe, Kale said carefully, some things are worth the risk of burning. The Emperor considered that. Perhaps. But not everyone was pleased with Kale's presence. He felt the hostility from certain dragons who visited the Emperor. One in particular, General Vaxmore, whose red scales seemed to glow with inner fire, looked at Kale like an insect to be crushed. You allow this creature to touch you, my Emperor? Vaxmore said during one visit. It diminishes your dignity. It saves my life, Zarthun replied coldly. Or would you prefer I die to preserve tradition? Vaxmore bowed, but his eyes promised violence. The threat came sooner than expected. During a formal ceremony in the Great Hall, Kale was required to attend. He stood behind the Emperor's platform, trying to be invisible, when a human servant approached with wine. For you, the servant whispered, pressing a cup into Kale's hands. From the kitchens, Kale raised it to his lips. Stop. Silthra's voice cracked like thunder. The cup shattered on the floor. Where the liquid touched stone, it sizzled and smoked. Poison. Everything happened at once. Guard seized the servant, who screamed about being paid in gold. Dragons turned toward Kale, and Zarthun, moving faster than something so large should move, spread his wing over Kale like a shield. A thorn from the servant's collar, one last desperate attack, bounced off the Emperor's wing membrane. A thin line of golden blood appeared where it scratched. The hall fell silent. Emperor Zarthun, ruler of 1,000 worlds, had protected a human-stable boy with his own body. Kale looked up at the wing above him, then at the Emperor's face. In those ancient eyes, he saw something he never expected to see a dragon feel toward a human. Concern, perhaps even something like friendship. Take the assassin for questioning. Zarthun commanded quietly. And double the guard. Someone wants a boy dead. He looked down at Kale, which means he's more important than even we realized. The assassin broke after 3 days of questioning. Kale sat in Siltra's study, a room filled with star charts and ancient texts, listening to the silver dragon explain what they'd learned. His hands still shook when he thought about how close the poison had come to his lips. General Vaxmore hired the human, Siltra said, her voice tight with anger. We found payment records, coded messages. He's been planning this for months. But why? Kale asked, what does killing me accomplish? Without you, the Emperor dies. And when he dies, the Council must choose a new ruler. Vaxmore believes he can seize power in the chaos. She turned her sharp gaze on Kale. But there's more. We found propaganda. He's been preparing. He plans to blame humans for the Emperor's death. Use it as justification to enslave your entire species across the Empire. The words hit Kale like a physical blow. Not just his life at stake, but millions of humans on hundreds of worlds, all because one dragon craved power. What do? He asked. We cure the Emperor before Vaxmore can strike again, Siltha replied. And that's where you become even more important. She led him to the healing chambers, where dragon physicians had been working constantly. Charts covered the walls, showing complex diagrams of psychic energy flows that Kale barely understood. The head healer, an ancient white dragon named Mortek, explained in simple terms. The Emperor was poisoned decades ago, a psychic toxin that's been slowly corrupting his mind. Your presence neutralizes it temporarily, but we finally developed a permanent cure, a ritual that will purge the poison completely. That's good news, Kale said, confused why everyone looked so serious. The ritual requires an anchor, Mortek continued. Someone psychically bonded to the Emperor who can guide his consciousness through the purging process. Someone who can touch his mind directly without being destroyed by it. Understanding dawned. Me. You, Silther confirmed. But you must understand the risk. You'll be fully merged with the Emperor's mind. 3 centuries of memories, emotions, power. No human has ever survived full psychic contact with a dragon. Even with your unique ability, this could kill you or leave you permanently broken. Kale thought of his mother, of the other stable workers, of millions of humans he'd never meet who would suffer if Vaxmore's plan succeeded. He thought of Zarthun, who despite being a dragon emperor, had become something like a friend. When do we start? The ritual took place at midnight. The healing chamber was arranged in a circle of crystals that glowed with soft blue light. Emperor Zarthun lay in the center, already sedated by dragon medicine. Kale was positioned beside his massive head, one hand touching the Emperor's scales. Once we begin, you cannot break contact, Mortek warned, no matter what you experience. Do you understand? Kale nodded, his throat too tight for words. The crystals flared bright. Energy surged through Kale's hand. And then he was falling, not physically. His body remained in the chamber, but his mind plunged into an ocean of consciousness, so vast it should have drowned him instantly. He felt 300 years crash over him like a wave. Battles across the stars. The joy of flight. The grief of losing Kiravel. The weight of ruling millions. Decisions that saved worlds and decisions that destroyed them. Any normal human would have shattered. Kale felt himself stretching, his sense of self threatening to dissolve into Zarthun's vastness. But he held on. He remembered his mother's words. Humans survive by being stubborn. He pushed deeper, searching for the poison. And there it was, a black rot spreading through the Emperor's consciousness like infection through a wound. It fed on doubt, on isolation, on the loneliness of power. It whispered that no one could be trusted, that weakness deserved death, that mercy was foolishness. Kale understood something then. The poison hadn't just been physical. It had been psychological, designed to corrupt Zarthun's judgment, to make him cruel and isolated, to destroy the Empire from within. He reached toward the corruption, but he didn't fight it with power. He had none. Instead, he did something only a human could do. He absorbed it. The poison flooded into his mind. Centuries of concentrated malice, pain, and despair. It should have killed him instantly. But Kale's human mind, built for processing trauma in short bursts, did what it had evolved to do. He felt the grief and acknowledged it. He felt the anger and let it pass through him. He felt the despair and chose hope anyway. Piece by piece, he filtered the poison through his consciousness, breaking it down into simple human emotions, feeling them and releasing them. His 80-year lifespan meant his mind was built for intensity, not duration. He could handle enormous pain because he'd never expected to avoid it. The corruption dissolved. The psychic landscape brightened, and Kale found himself being pulled back to his body. He gasped, collapsing to the floor. His head felt like it had been split open. Tears streamed down his face from emotions that weren't even his own. But he was alive. He was whole, and Emperor Zarthun's eyes opened, clear and bright as they hadn't been in decades. "Kale," the Emperor said, his voice strong. "You did it." The physicians erupted in celebration. Silthra looked ready to cry. If dragons could. Mortek began examining the Emperor with wonder. But then the chamber doors exploded inward. General Vaxmore stood in the entrance, surrounded by a dozen armed dragons loyal to him. His eyes blazed with fury. "I see you've cured our Emperor," he snarled. "How unfortunate. I had hoped to save the Empire from his weakness. But perhaps it's not too late to cut out the real disease, the human infection." He pointed a clawed hand at Kale. "Seize him, and if anyone interferes, there'll be branded traitors alongside him." Emperor Zarthun rose to his full height, and the chamber seemed to shrink around him. His scales blazed with renewed brilliance, gold and crimson like a living sunrise. Power radiated from him in waves that made even Vaxmore's soldiers step back. This was not the weakened, dying emperor they'd expected. This was 3 centuries of accumulated strength, fully restored. "You dare." Zarthun's voice shook the walls. "Enter my presence with weapons drawn? You dare threaten the one who saved my life. Vaxmore didn't retreat. His ambition had carried him too far to turn back now. I dare, because someone must save this empire from disgrace. You allow a human, a creature bred for servitude, to stand as your equal. You've grown weak, my emperor, sentimental. The empire needs strength, not this perversion of the natural order. Natural order? Zarthon moved forward, each step deliberate. You speak of order while plotting assassination and treason? I plotted survival. Vaxmore roared. When you died, I would have restored our pride, reminded the lesser species of their place. This human has corrupted you, made you forget what we are. Kale still knelt on the floor, exhausted from the ritual. His head pounded. His body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. But he forced himself to stand. If he was going to die, it wouldn't be on his knees. No, Kale said. His voice was quiet, but in the tense silence, everyone heard it. Vaxmore turned his burning gaze on the human. You speak unbidden in the Imperial presence? You prove my point with your very insolence. Then let me prove it completely, Kale said. He stepped forward, away from Zarthon protection, putting himself in full view of the rebel general and his soldiers. His legs shook, but he kept walking until he stood in the center of the chamber. He looked at the dragons surrounding him, some loyal to the Emperor, some to Vaxmore, most simply confused and afraid. He thought of all the humans across the Empire, living small lives in the shadows of giants. And he thought of what he'd learned in Zarthon's mind during the ritual. You're right about one thing, General, Kale said. Humans are weak compared to dragons. We can't breathe fire. We can't fly. We live maybe 80 years while you live for centuries. We're small and fragile and easy to break. Vaxmore smiled cruelly. Finally, the creature knows its place. But you're wrong about what that means, Kale continued. You think our short lives make us worthless. I think they make us valuable. We don't have time to waste on hatred or rigid tradition. We have to adapt, to learn, to change, or we die. That's not weakness. That's a different kind of strength. He turned slowly, addressing all the dragons now. I've touched the Emperor's mind. I've seen 3 centuries of memory. I've felt the weight of ruling an empire. And you know what I learned? Dragons are powerful, yes, but you've grown stuck. You do things because that's how they've always been done. You maintain order, but you've stopped growing. Heresy, one of Vaxmore's soldiers hissed. Truth, Silter said firmly, stepping to Kale's side. Uncomfortable truth, but truth nonetheless. When was the last time we changed a major policy? When did we last truly innovate rather than simply maintain? Kale nodded gratefully at her, then continued. During the ritual, I absorbed a poison that had been killing the Emperor for decades. A human mind saved a dragon life, because we're built differently. Not better or worse. Differently. What if that's true for everything? What if humans have value not despite our differences, but because of them? Pretty words from prey trying to avoid its fate. Vaxmore snarled. He advanced on Kale, claws extended. I'll kill you myself and end this madness. You'll have to go through me first, Zarthon said, positioning himself between them. And I am fully healed, General. How do you imagine that battle ends? Vaxmore hesitated. Behind him, his soldiers exchanged uncertain glances. Fighting a weakened emperor was one thing. Fighting Zarthon at full power was suicide. The Emperor's voice softened slightly, but lost none of its authority. I understand your fear, Vaxmore. Change is frightening, especially when you've lived 3 centuries watching the old ways work. But those ways are also slowly calcifying us. This human boy showed more courage in 3 weeks than most dragons show in lifetimes. He entered my dying mind and filtered poison through his own consciousness to save me. Tell me, is that not worthy of respect? Silence filled the chamber. Even Vaxmore seemed at a loss for words. Zarthon straightened to his full, imposing height. I hereby decree the following. Kale of the Stable Workers is granted the title Hand of the Emperor. He is the first non-dragon to hold imperial rank, and he will serve as my personal advisor on matters concerning the Empire's subject species. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Furthermore, the Emperor continued, the laws forbidding human contact with dragons are revised. Any human who demonstrates psychic resilience may train for positions previously forbidden to them. We will test. We will evaluate. We will adapt. And finally, General Vaxmore, you are stripped of rank and placed under arrest for treason, conspiracy, and attempted murder. You will be tried before the full council. Vaxmore's soldiers moved away from him, unwilling to share his fate. The general stood alone, his rebellion crumbling around him. You will regret this, Vaxmore said quietly. History will remember you as the emperor who weakened us. Perhaps, Zarthon replied, or perhaps history will remember me as the emperor who helped us grow. Time will tell. Guards led Vaxmore away. The other dragons began to depart, whispering among themselves. The Empire would be talking about this day for decades. Silthra approached Kale. You're either very brave or very foolish, Hand of the Emperor. Probably both, Kale admitted, then swayed on his feet. The exhaustion hit him all at once. Zarthon lowered his massive head until one eye was level with Kale. Rest, my friend. You've earned it. We have a great deal of work ahead of us. Friend, Kale managed a tired smile. Is that what we are? I spent 3 centuries believing dragons needed no equals, only subjects, Zarthon said softly. You taught me otherwise. Yes, Kale, we are friends. As Kale was led away to rest, he looked back once at the Emperor, the most powerful being in the galaxy, who had learned humility from a stable boy, who had chosen growth over stagnation. The Empire wouldn't change overnight. There would be resistance, setbacks, struggles. But for the first time, change was possible. And sometimes possibility was enough. Kale thought his mother would have been proud. He'd survived. And maybe, just maybe, he'd help make the universe a little bit better. That seemed like a good day's work for a human.